Detroit Lions OTAs are officially in the books. They had their last practice on Tuesday, and with OTAs behind us and mandatory minicamp done and over with, we are now getting a really good look at how this 2024 Detroit Lions squad is starting to shape out for the preseason. And with training camp just weeks away, we are getting a good look and a good opportunity to see what players are starting to rise to the top and what players are starting to fall behind. And today, we're going to take a look at a potential 53-man roster for the Detroit Lions, including a 16-man practice squad of how the Detroit Lions roster is starting to look, of course, with still a little bit more of the offseason to go. So with that being said, let's take a look and start off with the quarterbacking position, where, of course, Jared Goff is going to be the starter and Hendon Hooker are going to be the backup. Jared Goff is a phenomenal quarterback for the Detroit Lions, took the Lions to an NFC championship game a season ago, won the NFC North for the first time in 30 years, won a playoff game for the first time in 30 years. He is the guy, and after signing a 4-year, $212 million contract, he will be the guy for a very long time. Hendon Hooker, on the other hand, is going to be the backup quarterback. Despite starting OTAs with the third string, he has quickly arisen into that second string role where, yeah, he's having some issues reading the defense, having some issues getting the football out and holding onto the ball a little bit too long. But when the ball does come out in 7-on-7s and 11-on-11s, Hendon Hooker looks like a really, really good quarterback. And he's a player that the Lions want to keep around for a long time, will likely be in the upper echelon of the backup quarterback role. And there's just not a reality where the Lions keep 3 quarterbacks, and there's not a reality where Nate Sudfeld makes this roster and Hendon Hooker goes to either the practice squad or flat out gets released. So the quarterbacking position is a pretty easy one, and I would say the running back position is too. Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Sione Vaki will all make the roster. Obviously, Gibbs and Montgomery being on big contracts, with one of them being a first-round pick a season ago. Arguably the best running back tandem in the entirety of the NFL, as well as Sione Vaki being a 4th-round selection in this most recent class. And even though that doesn't guarantee him a spot on the roster, it makes it very unlikely that he will be released, considering he was a top 150 selection, as well as playing really, really well throughout training camp, OTAs, and minicamp. Now, I think that Craig Reynolds will be the 4th running back on this roster. I do think they carry 4 into the season, despite only carrying 2 a season ago. Running back is a position that the Lions do like. They like a lot of the players at their running back core, with Jahmyr Gibbs being a big-time player, David Montgomery being a big-time player, Sione Vaki being a draft pick. It does kind of push Craig Reynolds out of that RB3 role, but I do think they will keep Reynolds around either on the practice squad or on the active roster, because he's a guy that just fits everything that they want in a player. He does everything that he's asked of. When his number is called, he does everything right, does everything as a player, a good special teams contributor, a good RB4 option, and I think that he will stick around. Now, again, whether that is on the practice squad or not is yet to be determined. I think it's more likely that he will end up on the practice squad, opening up another position for somebody else. But just the way that this depth chart played out, we had enough room for Craig Reynolds, and I think if that they can keep him, they will look to keep him on the roster. And I do have Zonovan Knight making the practice squad as well, a player that started with the Detroit Lions a year ago but got injured very quickly throughout the season. I think the Lions still like Zonovan Knight quite a bit, and I do think he will make the practice squad as well. Taking a look at the wide receiver position, I have the Lions carrying 6 wide receivers into the NFL season, that being Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Khalif Raymond, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Antoine Green, as well as undrafted rookie free agent Isaiah Williams. Now, the Lions have an opening at that 6th wide receiver spot in the absence of Josh Reynolds. And even though none of the young guys are really standing out that much, right? Even though there's not a great player at this option, I do still think Isaiah Williams is probably the best candidate to do so. Haven't heard a whole lot about him from OTAs and minicamp, not as much as, say, Caden Davis. But I think with the youth, with the good contract, with, helping them save a little bit of money as a wide receiver 6, and the ability to still be very impactful if he does get the ball, I think Isaiah Williams still gets the slight nod for that last roster spot. But again, that could change as mandatory training camp as well as the preseason goes forward. I also have Caden Davis and Maurice Alexander making the practice squad as 2 players that can contribute on kick and punt returns, as well as the wide receiving positions. Tight end, pretty straightforward. Sam Laporta will start. Brock Wright will be the backup. And the third tight end is definitely up in the air, but I do think that James Mitchell, the former fifth-round selection from Virginia Tech, a big play threat, a vertical weapon for this offense, and a player that can be a big play guy, should be the pick over potentially Shane Zylstra, who does have good chemistry with Jared Goff, but again, is coming off of a really bad knee injury from a season ago that kept him out for the entirety of the year. And I think that the training camp, I just don't think that Shane Zylstra will do enough to make the roster, but will likely stick on the practice squad as a player that the Lions really like on their offense and a potential practice squad call-up player 2 or 3 times throughout the season if injuries do arise. The offensive line is going to start with Decker, Glasgow, Ragnow, Zeitler, and Sewell. That is your starting 5 offensive line, arguably the best starting offensive line in all of football. That is not a debate. But what could potentially be is the backups, where I have the Lions keeping 5 backups as well, meaning essentially 10 of their 50-man roster is going to be the offensive line. I think they keep 4th-round selection Giovanni Manu, 6th-round selection Christian Mahogany, 2nd-year player and former 5th-round pick Colby Sorsdale, Coyote Awasika, who played in the NFC Championship game a season ago, as well as Dan Skipper, their only true option as a offensive tackle depth as of now. So yes, the Lions are keeping 10 of their 50 players on the offensive line, meaning about 20% of their roster will be offensive line heavy. But I think that these are the right players to keep. I think with the rest of the way the depth chart works out, you still have a lot of good players, still have good depth at a lot of positions. And I do think that the offensive line is one of those positions you need a lot of quality depth at. And these are all players that I think if they go to the practice squad, if they get waived by the end of the preseason, all of them will be taken away. All of them will be scooped up. And unfortunately, the Lions are going to have to keep a lot of the offensive linemen on the roster if they want to keep them around. Let's go over to the defensive side of the ball. Hutchinson, McNeil, Reeder, and Davenport will be your starting 4 defensive linemen. They will, of course, all make the roster on big contracts with big money. I think the depth looks a little bit like this. James Houston as the outside linebacker / edge rusher rotation. John Kaminsky and Josh Paschal being in between guys, playing a little bit of edge on rundowns, playing a little bit of interior on pass rushing downs, and being good at both situations. I think that Broderick Martin's going to make this roster. I think he will make a big splash in the preseason and potentially make a case for playing time as well, with Mekhi Wingo and Levi Onwuzurike being pass rushing options from the interior. Levi having a good offseason so far, as well as Mekhi Wingo being a 6th-round selection with a lot of pass rushing juice and a lot of quickness. Linebackers is going to be Alex Anzalone, Jack Campbell, Derek Barnes, Malcolm Rodriguez, and Jalen Reese-Maybin. I don't see them carrying more than 6, and I think that these are easily the 5 that they're going to carry in. I think some of the other linebackers on this roster could make the practice squad and be called up for special teams reasons, but if you're only keeping 5 linebackers, considering you rarely play more than 3 at a time, 5 linebackers makes a lot of sense. You have a lot of role players. You have a lot of guys that can do a lot of things. Anzalone and Campbell will likely start. Barnes has a great role for himself. Rodriguez had an interception in the NFC Championship game. Reeves-Maybin is a phenomenal blitzer, a good pass coverage guy. You have a lot of different roles and a lot of different strengths in that linebacking core, and I do think it will all come together to help the Lions drastically. The cornerback room is going to be a little bit thin, but I think you're going to go heavy on the practice squad as well to keep a little bit of their depth around. Carlton Davis will be cornerback 1. Terrion Arnold will be cornerback 2. Ennis Rakestraw will be cornerback 3. Amik Robertson at cornerback 4. And Emmanuel Mosley at CB5. These are all players that have starting experience in the NFL or are top-rated rookies throughout this draft class. Obviously, Arnold and Rakestraw have yet to play, but Davis, Robertson, and Mosley have all been cornerback 1 for a defense at one point in time. And I just think that they have the skill set necessary to beat out some of the younger players on this roster, including guys like Khalil Dorsey or Stephen Gilmore. But I do think they keep those depth players around for potential practice squad call-ups, as well as just overall depth in the practice squad of this roster. The safety position, I actually went with 5 safety this year. I think all of them will play a role on this defense, and I think all of them have a case to make this roster as well. So despite only having 5 cornerbacks, you have Brian Branch, who's a little bit of a slot guy as well, can play the cornerback position in a pinch. You have Ifeatu Melifonwu, Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch, CJ Moore, who's a phenomenal special teams player, as well as Brandon Joseph, a player that the Lions wanted to get some playing time a season ago, wanted to find a spot on the active roster, is having a really good preseason and having a really good OTA mini camp sessions. I think he will make the active roster. They wanted him on the roster last year. There is no CJ Gardner-Johnson returning this year. That opens up a massive opportunity for Brandon Joseph to make the roster and be impactful on this defense. Moving over to special teams, of course, you're only keeping three. But that's going to be James Turner, Jack Fox, and Scott Daly. Although I do think that Hogan Hatton does have a chance to make the roster as a long snapper. I just don't know enough. I haven't seen any long snapping tape to tell me that one is better than the other. Scott Daly's the veteran. Scott Daly won the job last year to start. I think he will win the job again this year to start, but I think they will keep Hatton around on the practice squad as well. Now, there are a couple of practice squad players that we have not mentioned, so I will go over the entirety of the practice squad right now. That being Khalil Dorsey, Stephen Gilmore, Maurice Norris, Nate Lynn, Matthew Betts, Mitchell Agude, I believe is how you say it. And then you have, of course, Benjamin Neiman, the most recent linebacker pickup for them, Hogan Hatton, the long snapper, Duke Clemens, the center, as well as Connor Galvin, the offensive tackle. Kingsley Egukan is a player that I think will stick around, as will, as I said, Caden Davis and Maurice Alexander for kick return opportunities. Zonovan Knight, Shane Zalstra, as well as Michael Badgley. That is your 16-man practice squad with a couple of veterans, but a lot of young players. I think Dorsey, Gilmore, and Norris give you a lot of depth at your defensive backs. I think that Galvin and Clemens and Egukan give you some good depth at your offensive line. I think Betts and Lynn and Agude give you good pass rushing depth if you need it. Michael Badgley is the backup kicker if you are to need that as well. And there's just a lot of depth in this practice squad. Some of these guys will likely be taken away, but as of right now, that is how I see the practice squad playing out. And that is how I see the 53-man roster playing out for the Detroit Lions. As I said, you could move some things around. You could potentially throw Craig Reynolds on the practice squad and give a guy like Maurice Norris an opportunity, or Stephen Gilmore or Khalil Dorsey to make the active roster. You could certainly move some things around, but I think at the end of the day, these are the 53 plus 16 players that will be Detroit Lions in 2024. Things can, of course, change with the practice squad, with the preseason, with mini camp and training camps coming up. But as of right now, that is how I see the roster playing out. Let me know down in the comments below how you think this roster will shake out. If you disagree with any of my positions, if you have other guys in mind, of course, let me know down in the comments below what players you would change and what players you would move on from. And of course, if you've made it this far in the video, clearly you like the content. So if you've yet to do so, please subscribe to the channel. It helps the channel out a ton. We're shooting for 4,000 subscribers by the end of the summer, and your subscription could help a ton. But with all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.